So my name is Gwen Zimmerman, and what you'll see in the description, what we're going to share with you is some work that we did with Jess's middle school math teachers. What we hope, though, that you're going to take away from this is that this really is applicable across different levels. We did some very similar things with administrators, and it was really powerful as well. But we just thought whatever ideas you might be able to take away. We recognize that we all come from different experiences, different environments, and so you need to kind of figure out how that fits in your world and how you might be able to apply it. In the end, we'll put up our emails. Don't hesitate to contact either of us for with questions or suggestions, money, whatever that is. So when we did this a couple years ago, this was when we as a consortium were beginning to think about the Common Core. So our consortium, we are actually from the northwest suburbs. I am at Stevenson High School, and Jess is a principal at Aptekissick Junior High. All of her students feed into Stevenson. Our consortium, we are not a unit district. Stevenson is a high school, one school district. And then Jess is part of a K-8 district. The consortium is Stevenson High School and all the districts that send part or all of their kids to Stevenson High School. So in that consortium, we have regular meetings. The superintendents meet once a month. The principals meet once a month. There's regular articulation going on. And so 2 years ago, when we did this, at that time, the focus at the consortium was around ELA. And they were doing all kinds of work. Well, Jess and I were seeing an opportunity to begin to lay some foundation for the work we knew that was going to happen the following year, which was last year, where we brought together all math teachers, grades 6 through 12, to work on the Common Core. We'll reference that a little bit, but that's not what we're really here to share with you today. If you want to hear more about that, let us know, or you can come see our talk at NCSM in New Orleans, and that's actually what we're going to present on at that point. So at the time, I was director of mathematics, and I have since taken on the role of assistant principal, and I no longer have that role. So where this was...
Real quick, just before we get, can you hear me back there? Okay, yay. Before we get too far into the presentation, I just want to get a pulse on kind of who's who in the audience. So if you are a teacher, would you just raise your hand real quick if you're a classroom teacher? Okay. Administrator? And then other? Not sure what that might mean, but thank you. And then as a classroom teacher, are you a 6-8? If you're a 6-8 teacher, raise your hand. Okay, 9-12? K-5? Okay, so hopefully this was really built in mind for the 6-8, well really for 5-8 teachers. However, in different trainings that both Gwen and I have done separate of what we're going to share today with my specific staff, I've done this with K-5, we've done this with 9-12, so there are different pieces you'll be able to hopefully take away for whatever level that applies to you. So from my perspective, for us doing this work, for me what was important is I actually taught math at the junior high I am now the principal at. So for me, I have a very large passion for mathematics with my teachers, and so part of it was how do we start really getting them to understand what the Common Core is about. And one of the biggest pieces for us was really focusing on the instructional shifts. So not necessarily the content changes. They know the content. There may be some shifts from one grade level to the next, but it was really about the instructional shifts. And so we focused on the practice standards. And we really focused on what the practice standards mean, what they're about, and then how that actually informs their instruction and what they need to be doing with students. So that was really the premise of kind of our underlying framework and what we were trying to accomplish with my teachers in the 1 year that we had to do this. So first two sessions that we had, or the two sessions that we ran were both on half-day training sessions, like institute professional development days. So the first session we trained on was about 3 hours long, and the second session was about a 3-hour session. So that just gives you a time frame for how we did all of this. Do you want to anything?
Yeah, I think most of you got the handouts. There's 2 handouts. We're going to refer to those, so hopefully they were at the back that you have those. And so Jess and I, like we had said, had taken the opportunity because we had done so much articulation together already. As the director of mathematics at the time with Stevenson, I had been able to work with Jess as a middle school teacher, and then certainly then when she took on the role of principal, we continued that work. And again, just part of it is because we're both passionate about, part of it is we very much enjoy working together and just saw this as an opportunity to increase capacity.
So the first day that we had together, and I just need to frame it. It's actually kind of funny because talking about this, because it was 2 years ago, it's just hard to frame it now knowing where we've gotten teachers to. So we'll talk about that at the end and what we've been doing to sustain the work we started, which was kind of, we're talking about our starting steps right now. So we started with the mathematical practice number 3. And there was some reasoning for that, but the first day we said, all right, we need to just get them exposed to the practice standards. They had never read them, they hadn't looked at them, it was completely brand new to them. And we wanted to really hone in on one that we felt like kind of encompassed more of the standards. So at the time, and I think I would still feel this way, practice 3, which is communicate and collaborate basically with each other, critique the reasoning of others, all of that. We felt like kids have to persevere, kids have to reason, when you really start looking at the practice standards, a lot get encompassed in practice standard 3. So we dove into practice standard 3 very deeply, feeling like, okay, if we get to that and they have a really good understanding of that, some of the other things will naturally kind of fall into place. And so one of the things we did was just had them examine the 8 mathematical practices, looking for the first 3 words of each of the practice standards. How many of you have done this with teachers already? So yeah, when you do this, they see that the first 3 words of every practice standard are mathematically proficient students. And so you really spend some time talking about what the students are responsible for doing. Not necessarily the teacher, but what are the students responsible for doing and how are they responsible for engaging in the mathematics. So part of today's training, we're not going to walk you through we're going to walk you through what we did with teachers. That was kind of the premise. We just want to share with you some of the stuff we did with teachers, and hopefully that's what you could take back and do with your teams or your teachers. It's not necessarily going to be the activities. You won't necessarily be engaging in the activities today. So I just want to,
because it's
time-wise.
not our preferred way of standing up here and talking. We are going to, but knowing we only have an hour, we are going to embed just a little bit in. So there's going to be a couple opportunities we're going to ask you to talk with people around you. For some of you, it's going to be very unsatisfying because you're going to just begin to get into that conversation and we're going to cut you off. But again, for some of you who may not have been through similar experiences, we want you to at least begin to put yourself in the shoes of these teachers and what they might be thinking. So as Jess said, we chose to start with that mathematical practice 3. And our goal was to get at, as she had talked about earlier, that instructional shift. We felt this is where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck as far as what was doable by teachers and what was going to have the most impact without perhaps feeling overwhelming by trying to go at all 8 mathematical practices at the same time.
So then basically the way we started getting into the mathematical practice 3, we asked them on a piece of poster paper to reflect on and use actually the bulleted list. So we gave you a bulleted list of the practice standards. I found that it's actually helpful. When you look at the paragraph form, it's very easy to kind of glaze over it and not even pay attention to what you just read because there's a lot in it. So literally the bulleted list is just the paragraphs bulleted out. There's no word changes. It's just in a kind of shorter version to read through. So what we did is we had the teachers use the bulleted list to answer these 3 questions. And they had to put it on a big piece of poster paper and actually write it out. And to push them in their thinking, we actually had them answer these questions for each bullet point. Because when you read the paragraph, you can go, okay, overall I take away this. And maybe you got 1 or 2 things. When you have them go by the bullet, it actually made for a more kind of professional and rigorous dialogue. It actually lasted over a half an hour that they actually talked through that one practice standard. So that worked really well. What I'd like for you to do real quick, just to get you kind of engaging and looking at practice standard number 3, I'd like you to actually read through those bullets and then sitting with the person next to you, or talking with the person next to you, answer the 3 questions up here. Just briefly talk through them so you get the idea of what we were having teachers do. So the first question says, what would you hear and see kids doing? The second question is, what would you hear and see teachers doing? And then what do you perceive as the challenges to helping kids develop this practice? So go ahead real quick and just with the person sitting next to you, go ahead and talk through these 3 questions. Take about 2 minutes.
And we know it takes very little to just pose a question to teachers who are very passionate about what they do, and you just let them go. And probably you'd be quite happy with this session if we just let you talk the rest of the time. So a couple of things. For some teachers, this looks and sounds very different to what they're used to, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. One thing that I also want to share with you is in setting that up. Jess had said we had teachers grades 6 through 8. We were also very intentional in mixing them across grades when we had grouped them as well, because we wanted to push those conversations. There had been a lot more conversations with some of the 7, 8 teachers than there had with the 5th and 6th grade teachers. But we also wanted to value that varied experience they were going to bring to that conversation.
So one of the things, they were putting all of this on poster paper and they outlined it all on the poster paper, and then we put it up on the walls and then they reported out. So we kind of built a collective kind of database of what people felt like kids would be doing, teachers would be doing, and what the struggles might be. So we started there, and that was really just to get a baseline for where teachers were and where we maybe even needed to move them forward based on what they were saying for each of the questions. So that was a pretty good process because they got into a great dialogue about it. They were really reading through what the practices were, which is part of what we wanted. We wanted them actually reading the actual document. And then after that, the next piece we did, the next phase of this day, was really to use the videos to help teachers see some of the shifts. So it's one thing to see it on paper and it's one thing to have a discussion, but I think as soon as you put a visual to it, the teachers have a much better understanding of what some of those shifts might be. So 2 of the resources we used, one was Classroom Discussion, Seeing Math Discourse in Action, which is a K-6 video series, but there's a lot of good stuff in here. And when you see a kindergarten classroom doing some of the stuff, and then you're talking to an 8th grade teacher and they're saying they can't do it, it just becomes a nice resource to see, how you can actually, it doesn't matter how old the kids are, there's some great ways to get them talking and interacting. And since we were focusing on practice 3, and this focuses on discourse in the classroom, that was the nice tie-in. The other one we used, the publisher is Math Solutions. And then the other one we used was Number Talks, which may seem odd, but part of what Number Talks does is it's all about collecting student strategies and honoring all student thinking. And so when you watch how this runs, it's actually very powerful, and there's some things you can adapt to whole group conversations about any piece of content in mathematics. It doesn't have to be just on the Number Talk piece. The whole idea is that kids are sharing their strategies, you're collecting all the different answers, sharing multiple strategies, and the idea is that there's more than one solution pathway, or more than one pathway to a solution, and that's something you want to honor too, and I think that's part of the spirit of Common Core and what we'll get into a little bit. So this was a nice resource too.
So up to this point, we've had teachers take what their belief is. How do you translate this into the classroom? What does that look and sound like? Then we have, and we're going to show you the video here, or give you a sample, is again to help those teachers envision that. What we found too, and some other things that we've done, especially in the work with administrators, the video was very powerful. When we had worked with the administrators around the Common Core, they thought they were coming to learn about the standards. Our purpose was to teach them what good instruction in a math classroom looked like. And so we had initially asked them at the beginning is, talk about a recent math lesson. And it was an administrator academy we did in our consortium. And they would talk about, all the kids were raising their hand. she was using some technology, and you never heard anything about the mathematics. Afterwards, we did some very similar things that we're sharing with you, but the videos were incredibly powerful. It helped those administrators and the teachers envision what this looks like in the classroom.
So basically each video, on this day of training with teachers, we did 3 different videos. Any more than that, they seemed to just glaze over and it was almost too much. 3 different videos. We did the first one, we made them watch, or we had them watch 3 times. The first time was just to watch it and look for the math that was occurring in the lesson. That was the first time through. The second time we had them watch it, we were asking them to answer the question, what are the students doing in the lesson? What's the role of the student in the lesson? So that was the lens they were watching through the second time. And then the third time was, what is the teacher's role? So that was the first video we did. The second time, I think they would have kicked us out if we made them watch the video 3 times. So the second video, we had them watch 2 times, and the third video 2 times. They are no more than 2 minutes in length. They're not like 5-10-minute clips. They're just little quick snippets. They don't tell the whole story, but that's okay. That's not the point of it. The point is to see some instruction and have some dialogue about what they're seeing with the instructional piece. So we're not going to make you watch it 3 times, but we are going to show you a clip just to give you an idea of how this would have kind of run within a
So we'd
training.
like you to think about, what are you seeing the students do? What are you seeing the teacher do? And then we're going to ask you again to turn to that shoulder partner when we're done and just talk that through real briefly.
This is a 5th grade classroom.
For the whole group and decide, look at our strategies and decide if they work or if we need to revise them a little bit. So I want to start with Alex's group because I've heard a lot of groups actually talking about number 4. Number 4 came up a lot of how you could break a rectangular prism into layers and add up the amount in each layer. So Alex's group, can you start by telling us what you thought about that? And about Alex, speak first, please.
I think you should do different layers.
Okay.
Sorry.
The layers. One layer times all the other layers, which in this case would be 12 times 5.
Okay, and I have another student repeat what Alex said. How would he maybe revise strategy number 4? Shamari, go for it.
You count one layer and then you multiply it times how many other layers you have.
Okay, Alex, is that the strategy you meant? Okay. Can someone else repeat that? Say it like that.
You break it into layers and then you count how many cubes are in the layers and then multiply it by how many layers there are.
Okay, can I have one more person repeat that for us? Sorry, go ahead.
You see what the amount is in the layer and then you multiply it by the how many layers you have in your unit, cubic unit.
Okay, so real quick, talk about the math, but also what were the students doing in the lesson? So go ahead and talk about that with your shoulder partner.
Just perhaps interestingly, one of the videos we showed the group of administrators was a group of kindergarten students. And so we intentionally chose that, one, to make sure they do the math, and the other was for them to see how powerful it was at the kindergarten level that kids can be talking about this. Because again, they were having a tough time envisioning it at higher grades, let alone at kindergarten. And so if kids can be doing this at kindergarten, then certainly we can build that capacity in our students in our classrooms at the higher grades.
And some of the ideas that we were hoping that the group would come up with for the student piece, what the students are doing in the lesson, is really generating their own thinking and coming up with the solution and allowing for multiple strategies. Kids having to listen to each other. I think that's an indirect, within SMP3, within the practice 3, I think listening is an indirect requirement, not listed specifically in that practice standard, but if kids are going to critique each other and modify their thinking and all of that, they have to be able to listen to each other. And so how do you model that in a classroom? How do you, as a teacher, allow that to happen? And part of it was Helping teachers see that they're more of a facilitator. So they're asking a lot of questions of the kids. They're pressing kids for reasoning, their own reasoning. They're not saying, yes, that's right, now next problem. Yes, that's right, now next problem. And so often, how often when you ask a student, well, why do you think that? When they give you an answer, what do they do? What do students tend to do when you question their answer? They think they're wrong because they're not used to being questioned. They're not used to being pushed in their thinking. And so the process of a teacher becomes more about facilitating that conversation and pushing them wherever they're at, pushing them beyond that. And so that becomes a really important piece for teachers to take away when you're talking about the practices, and also when you're thinking about what the students are doing. In order to get students to dialogue in that way, you also have to set up a safe classroom. That was a huge, when we go back to this question, what do you perceive as challenges to helping students develop this practice? I would say at the 5-8 level, teachers really felt like it was the safety with kids feeling safe to express a thought and potentially be critiqued or get constructive feedback, especially at a junior high age, at that adolescent age. That's a very sensitive time for kids, and so to get them to put themselves out there and then get feedback back that they may be wrong, they're even more sensitive to that. When I did this with K-5 teachers, they were like, oh no, that's not a problem. Everybody's touchy-feely, everybody's whatever, because I was like, isn't that really hard? And they're like, no, not really. K2 especially was like, no, not really. But I think at the junior high school level, kids just want to have the easy way out. They don't really want to be pushed. So I think that's also part of the teacher's role. And so how do you set up that safe environment? That becomes a huge discussion.
So one of the other pieces that had come out, as well as teachers were going through this and talking about it, was the need to explicitly teach kids how to listen. So that was the other piece. We kind of take that for granted, but if we really want kids to be talking and communicating with each other, there's not just the talking about it piece, there's the listening. How do you listen to one another? And so that came out of that discussion as well.
So after we did all 3 videos and we really had this dialogue after each video, kind of like this, and just extended that conversation. We're not going to watch more videos, but that was the idea. We asked them what patterns they noticed with students and teachers. So that became a nice conversation too, just to summarize the video piece. That was a great question. We created a nice dialogue. Then, this to me was the best part. So teachers remember they started on that poster paper. They answered those 3 questions on their poster paper with practice 3 in mind. After the videos, we had them go back and reflect on what they had originally put on their poster and modify or enhance anything they felt they maybe either left out or now don't agree with, based on the conversation and based on the learning that had just happened. And so we had them actually do it in a different color. So we actually had, like, let's say they did it in black ink first, then they may have gone back in with green or red or purple or whatever, so that you could see where their growth had happened, and even just where maybe their thinking had changed, or where they were like, oh, that's another piece I should add in. That might be happening in my classroom now. So that was another good chunk of time, but it was a nice way to end that session on day 1.
So like Jess has talked about, a lot of you are working with teachers and doing professional development with teachers. So a couple of things that we've talked about, but just again want to point out is throughout this process so far, there are assessment opportunities for us as those professional developers. So that initial poster that they created lets us know where are they coming in at. When we were able to see the changes they were making, we could see where there were some shifts and where they were headed. So that was really informing to us. The other piece that we took away from that day 1 too, when we looked at the challenges, is not only kind of what the classroom looks like, but the other piece that came out, and it's not going to be surprising to you, is, okay, that means then the problems that I'm doing with kids in class have to look different. So the next challenge that comes up then is, what about those tasks? Not every task is going to lend itself to mathematical practice 3.
Mm-hmm. And so just to finish out that first day, we did ask them just to answer these 2 questions to get more feedback and before that next session. But really the feedback we got was that we really needed to talk about tasks on the next session. So that was day 2. So day 2 was more about task selection. Real quick, just for day 1, are there any questions about the first day just before we move on to the second day that we did? Yeah. I think it was a combination of both, to be very honest with you. Like, okay, I get it. I get that this is a good practice and this is what I should be doing. Now, how do I do this? And wow, that's a lot of different things I need to think about to do that. So I think it was, they understood why, and they got that they needed to head that way, but I think they saw that there were some different things they might need to understand better in order to get there. And honestly, I think there was a lot of buy-in at the beginning, if I were to be very honest. Now, I don't think it happened overnight, though. I think it started their thinking about it. And then as we dove into tasks, and then I think it got even more clear for them on how to do that. So that's a great question. But overall,
and
they
another
understood.
piece, when we created the groups, you're very intentional who you're putting together to, who's going to help push some of that thinking, some of those teachers that are already doing it in their classroom and the experiences they can bring to that conversation. So that's another piece of how to decide to group people together.
Mm-hmm.
I think as teachers begin exploring how to do that type of instruction where it's really very student-centered, that it's important there's a lot of follow-up because there can be a lot of buy-in at first when they go in their classroom and try it, and then they start to get parent complaints about, hey, I'm not teaching my
Yep.
child. And when this teacher teaches it a different way, and so you kind of need to bring all teachers up to speed moving forward, and we need to do a lot of follow-up.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of rational.
Well, in conversations I've had with other teachers who've gone and tried it and come back and report back, they've admitted the first time or two they've tried it, they've been in tears after the lesson. They themselves have been in tears just because it was hard. And kids, I think, felt like they were being left like kind of on their own. And so they felt as teachers, we as teachers do not like to feel like we're failing our students. I think by nature we're helpers and we want to help, but by helping we almost do too much of, we're doing all the math and then they're not. And so how do you find that right balance? But how do you help kids understand that? And I think that's a huge piece so that kids don't walk away feeling frustrated and teachers don't walk away feeling frustrated. I think it's important to help educate kids about how they need to learn mathematics and what the research says about how they should learn mathematics best and that they need to be able to talk about it with their peers. And so, but I will tell you, I've had teachers report that the first 2 times they tried it, they were physically in tears and there may have been children in tears. But then like the third time they did it where they stuck with it, they said their lesson was the best lesson they've ever had. And so I think that's where the power comes in. And I think you do need to have that follow-up and keep telling those stories. And from an administrative standpoint, my goal was to help my teachers know that it was safe to try it. And if it failed, that was okay. And that you just need to go back, let's talk through it. How could you make it better next time? And I think that's a huge piece that if that's not there, if that safety in that environment for teachers to take risk is not there, then why would a teacher try something new? So that's another piece, just to kind of on the back burner from my standpoint. So day 2, tasks. These were our goals for that day. Do you want to touch on this, or you want?
If you've ever, and we talked to a few people early on, those who passed the chocolate cake and got her early, talked to them just a little bit while we were having some conversations. And Diane Breyers, if you've ever had the pleasure of hearing her present, she's talked a lot about high cognitive, low cognitive demand tasks. And so this is where you'll see this, where this has come from. And it's really powerful stuff. It's pretty much embedded in almost any conversations that we have around instruction, especially as it relates to the Common Core and the mathematical practices. And so knowing that that's where teachers are saying this is where we need help is where do we get these tasks from? So that at the heart of that Standard for Mathematical Practice 3, and one might argue some of those other mathematical practices, comes down to the task. If you don't have the right task, discourse isn't going to happen. There's not a whole lot of student discourse around, how did you solve the problem 2x plus 3 equals 7? There just isn't a whole lot there. And then, so using that idea to help them think through that.
So we walked through what a mathematical task is, actually just defined it for them, which basically it's either one complex problem or a set of complex problems that all kind of tie together, but that really lend themselves to either having multiple pathways to get to the solution, allow for kids to really talk about their process. There's that whole component. And then we actually had them do if you want to grab your other handout that you have, it should be the stapled packet. We had them, and this is actually from Diane Breyers and Tim Canel. That's something we borrowed from them, that they did. Basically, we had them do these 2 tasks. And so we won't, for the sake of time, have you actually go through them today, but they are definitely something you could use with teachers or you yourself could go through. But the first thing we had them do was actually complete the top task. And if you just read it real briefly, basically, if you were a student reading that problem, you see two numbers pop out at you, 10 and 15, right? 10 and 15? 10 and 15. What do most students do when they see numbers? Either add or multiply. So chances are a kid could guess, get that problem right, and you now don't know whether they were the guessing student or the student that actually understood what to do. So that problem, when you really look at the problem, isn't written very well for getting good feedback on what students know and if they really understand the concept. So because there's just two numbers and basically 50-50 chance on probably getting it right. If you look at the second task, the fencing task, I'll give you a second just to read through that one very quickly. So this fencing task gets at area and perimeter again, same concept of just of the area piece, but it allows, it really does get at whether students understand the relationship between perimeter and area, what area is, and then even how to find the maximum area in the problem. So it gets at much more dialogue. I think basically if you go to the kind of the reverse side, what we ended up having teachers do was compare the two tasks. So they used this chart, wrote down some of the similarities between the two tasks and then what the differences were. And when you're really wanting kids to, remember we had the lens of getting kids to talk about mathematics, talk about the mathematics they're doing. That was the lens that we approached most of this from. And so in order to get students to talk about the mathematics, to have a problem like the fencing problem, there's a lot more dialogue that will happen in a classroom. You could probably use that problem for an entire lesson. Or even multiple days, you could weave that in. So one problem now becomes much more of your focus versus multiple little problems throughout the lesson. And that's the role that a task can play in your classroom. So then that was our introduction to a task. That was our introduction to different levels of just kind of writing a task. Not that every task has to be like that fencing one, but that gets at what we were trying to have teachers understand. So then what we did is this second piece. So if you now you go to the next page, which says, I'm sorry, I keep walking from the screen, which says analyzing mathematical tasks. Without any understanding about high cognitive demand or low cognitive demand, no definition of those words, nothing besides just telling them that those were two words we were going to use. That was it. We had them go through and categorize each of these 7 tasks, whether they were low or high cognitive demand. So what we'd like you to do right now with your shoulder partner is go through and decide on each of the tasks on this task selection sheet, decide if they, again, we haven't given you any background either, decide if they are high cognitive demand or low cognitive demand, and then kind of note what's helping you make that decision, okay? So go ahead and take maybe 3 or 4 minutes to go through those tasks. Just to grab everybody's attention back to the front. Real quick. Did you think A was a low or a high demand? Low.
M-E-Y-E-R.
How could you make it a high cognitive demand task?
How you take a text.
Generalize the pattern?
All the scaffolding.
Maybe ask them to extend the pattern out to a certain point, right? So, and that would be a question I would actually ask teachers and actually have them talk through is how could you, if you think it's low, now how could you make it high? And they actually come up with some great ideas. What about task B? Low or high? High. Why is it high? What made it high in your mind? Yeah. So that last question that kind of brings it together too? Okay. What else? Different strategies, and then having them talk about that. What about C? Low. I tell you, I get mixed reviews on that one every time, which creates a good conversation with teachers. I think for sure the first part of it is low. It's determining whether the second part actually makes it high, right? And if you're unsure, how could you make that second part even better to make it really a high demand task? Instead of what other fractions are near 4/5 in size, what else could you ask them to do? Explain, compare two different ones. You could actually have them model another fraction, create another way to model that fraction. You could kind of add on in different ways, and we'll show you an example in just a second. And then task D, low. Low, and again on a table, you could ask the question, how could you make that a higher level demand task? But it is low. And then what about E? There's an error, but besides that, low. And then F, task F. Low or high? I've had people tell me high because it had a lot of words. I don't know that that's a good reason, but why would it be high? What's that? They're noticing patterns, right? And then write about how you solve the last problem in each set after you've solved them. And then I would say even asking them to talk through what they noticed in the pattern sets and the connections they're making. If they could explain their thinking in that, that really makes it a high level question. So that's just a way to get people into seeing some tasks. They're elementary. The elementary tasks actually work well for junior high and high school teachers, just to get them into thinking about what makes something high or low. And then that sheet that follows, we have them go through and actually mark on this sheet high or low, and then they develop criteria on their own for what makes something low or high demand. And then you can generate that within the group and use some of that as you go forward and write questions yourself. And then see if it meets your criteria as you're writing those questions.
So a few things is, part of the conversation that was really powerful with these teachers, and certainly if you have the opportunity, is the conversation that teachers have, why it's high, why it might be low, and how you might change it. Because that, again, remember, a big challenge that the teachers had anticipated is where I find these tasks. The other thing is, not all tasks that we give kids have to be high cognitive demand. However, if we want kids to, if we want to see that mathematical practice 3 in the classroom, that's not going to happen with low cognitive demand tasks. So again, that doesn't mean there's not a place for them, but it's certainly not going to support that critiquing, that justification, and that discourse that's going to happen in the classroom. Somebody had asked me a question, so where do you kind of find these high cognitive demand tasks? We have textbooks, and they're so rote, and they're just so straightforward. And I'll just offer real quick, how many know of Dan Myers? If you have not gone, just Google Dan Meyer. You'll come. He has a blog that has tens of thousands of followers. He was a math teacher. He's left the classroom working on his PhD right now. And Bob Williams, one of our chairs for next year's program, has secured him to be here next year to do the talk. And so he talks about how you can take these textbook problems and you de-scaffold them, if you will, to make them much more rich problems. So again, if you have not seen Dan Meyer stuff, just Google him. You will find all kinds of great stuff attached to his name.
And then the other piece is the Park and Smarter Balance tasks that they have released are another good starting point just for examples of even how to kind of get your juices going on what kinds of problems make good problems. There's just some good tasks out there and already created. So one of the pieces, though, that we end up then getting to with teachers is that a lower level demand task is more of your memorization type task or a procedure without connection, which is this next sheet in your packet. There's a lot more detail in there. And then the higher demand tasks are really procedures that are connected to different pieces, and then also the doing of the math. So having kids actually create problems and do more of the math. So if you go to the next sheet, sorry to keep pulling up a lot of different pieces of paper, this gives you an example walking through. So if you're talking about fractions, memorization might be asking kids what's the rule for multiplying fractions. Just knowing the rule, memorizing it. Procedure without connection is just multiplying two fractions. That tends to be where we stop. In most of our, whatever content you're talking about, that tends to be where we stop. If you go to the right side of that paper, at the top, it talks about procedures with connections. Find 1/6 of 1/2, which is still technically multiplying, but they need to use pattern blocks and then draw their answer and explain their solution. So now they're modeling that they actually understand the concept. They're not just doing it and getting an answer, it's really not about the answer. It's about their process and showing that they understand what it means to find 1/6 of 1/2. And that's really what you're trying to get at. How do you write problems that allow for that? And then the doing of the math might be creating a real world situation, and they give the example of 2/3 times 3/4. So what would be a real world connection to that? So that's just a flow of different types of problems around even one concept, and that can be continued to be applied.
If you've ever heard Diane speak too, one of the things that she will almost always share too is the research. And so where this comes from, and I was having a conversation again just early on at the beginning of the session with some people, is you look at the TIMSS, and they looked at the U.S. and some of the higher performing countries. And there was evidence there to say that here in the U.S., we present kids with problem solving opportunities. The difference is we take away any of that high cognitive demand by stepping them through exactly how to solve it. So it's not that the problems aren't out there. It all comes back to the instruction in the classroom, which again was what we were trying to work with teachers on, and using the Common Core and the mathematical practices as an opportunity to do that.
And just on that piece too, when you think about the word problems you give in class, how many of us, I'll use all of us because I've even done it, when you read the problem, just through the tone of your voice, you point out what they need to pick up on, right? So even in that, scaffolding or no scaffolding tied to that question, just in the way you read that problem, or you have them read it, or you ask questions about it, now they've picked up the important information, and they don't even know why. It's because you inflected, or you pointed that out, or you cheered at that number. I don't know. However we all do that, that tends to be another way that kids pick it up. And so an encouragement we give teachers is to just give students the problem and let them start to generate their own thinking about it. Let them start to ask the questions, and us as teachers, stop talking and step back and let them at least start thinking about it. Because with practice number 1, it's persevere in problem solving. So how do we get kids to persevere if we continue to step in? That's a great thing to get teachers to think about. And so it's hard. It's hard to not want to step in, and it's almost like teachers having to almost like pull themselves backwards to not want to do that. And so it's encouraging that piece. Yeah. I think
if you haven't, I would go read Carol Dweck's mindset book. I would highly recommend that. She talks about the fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. Those of us who tend more towards a fixed mindset believe intelligence is fixed. We're afraid to make mistakes. Versus the growth mindset, we see mistakes as learning opportunities. And so she talks about that. And she also talks about it specifically in different chapters about education. The things we say as teachers, how it might support a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. So I would suggest that as a possible resource.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly. Right. Right. Okay, so at the end of day 2, these were the 3 questions we asked them, and we actually collected this feedback so that we knew where teachers were at, and then even though this was within 1 year, what we needed to continue to work on with them. So the first question says, what are 3 things you're thinking about differently? What are 2 questions that you still have? And then what is 1 strategy you experienced today that you might implement in your classroom? I might even change that to say that you would implement tomorrow or something like that. So just that was a nice way to get some feedback from people too on where they were at and then where we needed to continue to support them. So one thing I just wanted to kind of share, and then we'll wrap it up and answer some questions, but our follow-up. So that was like the first year Common Core came out, and so that was really our way of getting teachers into it, teachers into the language of it, knowing full well that the following year would be all the consortium work to dive into the actual content, to dive into rebuilding and realigning all of our targets and our scope and sequence documents and all of that. So realigning all of the curriculum. So we continued to talk through the practice standards as a way, really, that was our main focus, that really it matters that the instruction needs to shift. My Algebra 1 teachers will still be fine with the content, even though there's a few new standards in there, and we might reorder how we teach things. The content is the content. But the practices and the way they're having the kids talk about the mathematics that was the big shift. And if that didn't change and they didn't understand that, then we really accomplished nothing. And so we continued to use the practice standards even today to get at those instructional shifts that need to be happening. And then how did we sustain it? I think we continued professional development in our specific district. We continued professional development and ongoing conversations with teachers and kept it as an open dialogue. Asking questions. Okay, this worked, this didn't work. I'm really trying to do this, but it's not, what would you suggest? Then really, I would say the underpinning piece was our collaborative team structure. So the teachers don't work in isolation. I think a huge piece is to sustaining this is that teachers actually work in teams. And so that there's this whole collaborative effort. I just had a teacher in my office yesterday. She's on maternity leave, and she's trying to build her assessments for when she's going to be back in the classroom so she's not so overwhelmed when she's back. She's not coming back till December. It's October. So she's like just wanting to get her head wrapped around it. She's like, I tried to build these assessments at home and I stared at the standards and I could not get started. Like, she's like, I stared for a couple hours and was not making sense of them. Came in yesterday for a morning time with the teachers that were off in the morning. They built the assessments for like 2 or 3 units within 2 or 3 hours. Together. She's like, it was amazing when we all came together and we all started sharing ideas. Boom, boom, boom. This means that. That standard means this. That's this type of question. She's like, she literally came down to the office and goes, it was awesome. I feel so much better. We got these 2 things done, or whatever she wanted to get done, and then they're coming back to meet one more time. So that whole team effort has a lot of power. And I think if she was doing that by herself, I guarantee you her frustration level would be even higher. And I don't know that she's frustrated. I think the teachers right now, they get it. They want to do it well. They may be overwhelmed because everything's new. The lessons are new, the assessments are new, the order of content is new. But for her and for the teachers, because they have each other, that becomes very powerful and very encouraging. And I think that's something I wanted to note because I think that is a huge part of the success of where we're at and just even teachers feeling like they can do this. And some of you,
that goes back to Kevin's comment he made earlier about the sustainability, is there needs to be follow-up. And this is 2 years later that Jess is talking about when we first had those initial conversations. So as you're having conversations with your colleagues and with teachers, it's just about repetition and you keep spiraling that, and it's that ongoing conversation and support. It doesn't happen overnight. It can't be, and we know professional development, a one-shot deal like now, is not the best professional development, but it's through those conversations, through that practice, through that reflection.
And then the other piece for sustainability was just through our assessment practices. So the actual writing of our assessments, now that we're rewriting them aligned to our new units and standards that are in the units, we're making sure we're keeping with this high demand task piece. Now granted, you want low and high, you need a variance of different levels of questions and all of that, but really that high level that we're trying to keep kids accountable to, we're putting in the assessments to make sure all staff and all teachers are kind of holding all kids accountable. So that's just on as we're building the assessments, trying to integrate those high-level, high-demand tasks. And then some, like I referenced earlier, the PARC and Smarter Balance tasks that are starting to come out, especially within Smarter Balance. There seems to be some nice ones that were just released a little while ago that actually have some great student dialogue for actual in-class tasks. So just another piece to think about.
So I know we're at the end of our time. Hopefully we offered something you could take away. We are available. If you want to email us, follow up with conversation. We don't claim to have the answers. We're only offering some things that we've tried and what seems to have worked and maybe things we do differently. So we wish you very good luck on your implementation and follow through on the Common Core, and hopefully take advantage to use that to make those instructional shifts in those math classrooms. Thank you.
Thanks.